Showtime! The Capital G show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here doing another episode of Boomer Bust, and this time we're talking about this incredibly powerful blue army known as the Nekroz. They are one of 3 archetypes to be simultaneously released in the Secret Forces alongside of Spirit Beast and Yosenju, and I want to say at this point unarguably the most powerful. And this is going to be one of those boomer busts where at the end of the video pretty much 96% of people agree with my synopsis on the deck, like my take on it and the power level of the deck, its place in the competitive meta, and its impact on the competitive meta. Now, if for some reason you've been living under a rock for, I don't know, maybe the last 2 weeks or so, let me introduce you to Nekroz. That is why I'm here. That's why you're watching the video. So Nekroz are primarily a ritual-based archetype, although they're not exclusively ritual monsters. They do have some normal effect monsters that enhance their plays, just really enhance the deck as a whole. You have Strategist right here. Basically, he pays for all ritual summons, no matter how many stars the ritual monsters are. And I mean, they have some pretty high ones in Decisive Armor, Trishula, and where you at? Valkyris right here. It's actually my favorite one just because the artwork looks so amazing. But these guys they're actually dual terminal related. Just to give you a quick history lesson, they're supposed to be, from what I hear, descendants of the Gishki, although to me it seems like they're more descendants of the Ice Barriers. When the official Dual Terminal 3 storyline comes out, we'll obviously know, but what you need to know is that they are definitely renditions of some of the most powerful synchro monsters of all time. You know, cards like Trishula, Baronic, Gungear. I mean, these guys were no joke when they were synchro formed. That's why a lot of people thought that this deck was going to be highly playable. Now, what really sets Nekroz apart from ritual-based decks in the past, decks like Herald of Perfection and Gishki, is that Nekroz really don't have the pitfalls that ritual decks have always historically had in Yu-Gi-Oh! You know the ones I'm talking about. Like, we know that if you're going to build a ritual deck, you obviously have to have ritual monsters. You have to have something to summon. But you also have to have ritual spells because ritual monsters need these to be summoned. That also meant that you had to run ways to get to those spells and monsters, because if you had too many blue cards and not enough green, you'd lose. And if you had vice versa, you'd also lose. You have to have a combination because the cards work in conjunction. The cards can't do anything alone. And that's where Konami has adjusted Nekroz. So for starters, Nekro monsters all have effects built into them, not just on-field effects like other rituals. They all have hand effects. This gives them double utility. You know, some of these guys can protect other ones from being targeted. Some of them can give others attack gain. You know, some of them, like Brio, can just search any monster in the entire archetype. It gives you speed. It gives you dual utility. It solves the huge problem of what if you drew too many monsters? What if you have a ritual on board, but you top deck another ritual monster that you can't summon? How do you advance your game state? Okay, well, this deck pretty much answers that question, because if you have a Valkyris on board and you top deck a Decisive Armor, okay, well, now you have battle protection for this guy. It actually is not really that bad of a position to be in. Also, you have to look at their spells. Spells in the past, they tried to kind of start it with Gishki. They tried to make it so that you could kind of reuse the spells a lot easier, so that you weren't so reliant on, you know, getting cards like Preparation of Rites. Well, this deck has pretty much took it an entire step further. This deck, every single one of these spells, and they have 3 different spells, they're all busted as hell, because some of them let you banish from the graveyard, which other ritual decks in the past have definitely not had. But it even goes further than that. Every single one of their ritual spells, as long as you don't control a monster, you can banish a spell and you can banish a monster, and then you can basically tutor for any ritual spell. So, you know, if you have Cycle in the graveyard, you can just banish it and a Decisive Armor, and then you can add Kaleidoscope to your hand. So it's like, you never really run out of resources. And honestly, I thought that the ability to tutor any other ritual spell card straight from the graveyard for pretty much no cost was enough, but apparently Konami didn't think that way. It's almost like they looked at a card like Advanced Ritual Arts and they said, how can we make all the Nekroz ritual spells that good but still make them unique at the same time. And sure enough, they sure as hell found a way to do it. You look at a card like Kaleidoscope, okay, well, this can summon multiple Nekroz monsters at the same time, and they even took it a step further. You can actually pay for those ritual summons using monsters out of the extra deck. I mean, that is fucking unheard of, because we've never even thought of something like that before Nekroz. And it goes one step further. The players who were really smart actually started to realize that in new challengers, we got a monster, Herald of the Arc Light, that when he's sent to the graveyard for a ritual summon, he actually can tutor even more ritual cards. So you can just have your simple combos like activate Kaleidoscope, summoning Unicorn. You can use Herald of the Arclight to pay for the summon, and then when Unicorn is summoned, this guy goes to the graveyard, and then he basically can search any of these cards, including more spells. I mean, the searchability of this deck is probably the highest that you've ever seen. You look at a card like Nekroz Mirror. Okay, well, this once again doesn't have to use actual resources from your hand or your field. You can actually use the graveyard to pay for ritual summons. So, I mean, this is almost like Miracle Fusion. The next pitfall that Nekroz don't suffer from that other ritual decks in the past have definitely been hurt by is the fact that Nekroz can get away without actually having to play real defensive trap cards. I mean, this has been one of the Achilles heel of ritual decks historically, because we know that when you're running so many ritual monsters and spells and so many ways to get those ritual monsters and spells, it doesn't leave a lot of room for purple cards, which is why Roll to Kree has always been a favorite in ritual decks, because ritual decks have always had the mindset of why try and run a full trap lineup when we don't have space for it, when we could just run one trap and destroy your full trap lineup. So you've always seen this in Demise and Herald of Perfection, etc., etc. This deck can actually play defense effectively because it can do it from the hand. Remember those second effects that I was talking about, the ones that activate in the hand? They give this deck loads of protection. I mean, dropping big beaters in this deck isn't a problem, but it's always been a concern of ritual decks. Okay, well, what happens if you lose your field? I mean, basically, you just have to wave the white flag because you might get OTK'd, you might get mounted. It's probably just GG. This deck doesn't have to worry about that, because if you think you're going to OTK Nekroz, sorry, it's just not going to happen. I think Burning Abyss is definitely going to have to completely change their deck to adapt, because Valkyris basically says no. If you don't know what this guy does, he's basically a theme version of Swift Scarecrow. He ends the battle phase, except he's even better. Not only is he searchable from Brio, which, I mean, they're both at 3, but in addition, he stops any attack. It doesn't have to be a direct attack. Somebody can just be trying to attack your Manju or something like that that you desperately want to live, and you can just say, okay, activate Valkyris, discard it to the graveyard, your battle phase is over, pass turn, so you don't take any damage, and you have a card like Decisive Armor. If for some reason your opponent puts a big monster on board, bigger than Valkyris, which I guess is possible. Okay, well, you can basically just use Decisive Armor. You can slam a card like Valkyris or Trish, and a lot of times your monster will get upwards of, 3,500 plus. So taking down those Clees that get to like 3,100 or even higher than that, it's really not that difficult when you have hand traps that can get your guys almost at 4,000 attack. So this deck doesn't need to actually play purple traps to have adequate defense. With all that being said, let's be honest here. I mean, none of this good would mean jack shit if the ritual monsters themselves weren't good, if they didn't have on-field effects that were actually relevant to today's metagame. And I'm talking about the ability to constantly add other ritual spells from the deck to the hand for free, essentially. Every single ritual monster having a secondary effect built right into it. A lot of times ones that you can activate during your opponent's turn, like this guy and this guy and this chick and whatever the fuck this behemoth thing is. If the ritual monsters didn't have effects that were actually relevant in the meta, it would all be kind of pointless. But I mean, these dudes do. I mean, if there's one thing that Nekroz can absolutely destroy and one thing that they seem to hate on, it's just monsters being summoned from the extra deck and just special summon monsters in general. It kind of reminds me of Shadows. Remember how Shadows came out and we were basically living in an XD world, and Shadows were like, okay, well, if you want to XC, then I'm going to fusion for free. And I'm going to activate all of these effects. I'm going to summon something that's probably even stronger than your XC. And I'm basically going to go plus like 3 while I'm doing this. I'm going to draw and blow up your background, do all this other shit you're not going to like. This deck is very similar to that. This dude right here, not only can he negate the effect of any special summon monster, he can take their attack down to 0. So this dude can run over shit that's like 3,000 attack. This card right here, Brio, he's a double bounce for special summon monsters. So you have double Dante? No, you don't. I spin them both. And then Unicorn, this card is even crazier because he just negates the effects of anything special summon from the extra deck. You don't even know how fucking hard it is to kill this when you're playing Sertellar Knights because none of your Exceeds have effects. They won't even work. So this deck basically, it destroys and it hates on monsters special summon from the extra deck or just special summon monsters in general. And we live in a game that's pretty much what defines the game. Bunches of monsters being special summoned from the extra deck or just being special summoned in general. I'm looking at you, Infernoids. So I look at this deck and I'm just like, all your monsters have secondary effects and their on-field effects are really relevant too. In fact, the other effects that aren't busy hating on special summon monsters, they all give you crazy utility. This guy pops back row. This chick can blow up anything. This guy lets you draw cards by tributing cards, especially when you just use cards that you've already used their effects. Like, okay, summon this guy, go +1, then tribute it to draw a card. Like, that gives you speed and utility at the same time, which is mind-blowing. Now, the play style of Nekroz is really interesting. I think that it's a control-based deck at heart, and I think that it makes its most aggressive plays as counter pushes. I say that it's a control-based deck at heart because these cards like Klaus and Unicorn, these two specifically, they don't really require much support. Like, these are cards you can put on the board by themselves, and you know if you're playing against Shaddolls or Sertellar Knights or Burning Abyss, your opponent is going to have to do things that they don't want to do to get these cards off of the board. Assuming that they don't have like a Regeki or something, because these constrict what your opponent wants to do. These hate on special summons, these hate on extra deck monsters, and that's what those decks are completely based on. That's what those decks want to do every single turn. And if you have the gen lock using something like Klaus, it gets even worse because now your opponent has to deal with a 2300 defense monster without being able to special summon, while you can still do whatever the fuck you want. So this is a deck where you can summon these monsters and you don't really have to protect them. You don't have to have backup. You don't need a Mirror Force or a Fiendish Chain protecting these guys. And then when your opponent actually does commit to the board, they, you know, waste multiple cards trying to out these guys. That's when you make your counter push. Since you probably won't have any monsters on board, well, then you can start using these guys as second effect. You can start adding ritual spells to the hand for free. And that's when you bring out the big guns. That's when you bring out Trishula and Brio. You start spinning your opponent's Trevors and their Dantes, and you bring out Trishula. You basically just rape their hand, field, and graveyard. Keep in mind, Trishula actually has to he has to be able to hit all three cards, which is why this is a perfect counter push play, because when your opponent has committed to the board, then I mean, basically you just summon these guys and just clean up. So this is a deck that doesn't need to play at a fast pace. You're not going to be seeing this deck OTKing many opponents. I mean, it does do that occasionally, but it's not really something that the deck is based around. For the most part, this is a deck that likes to sit on monsters that constrict the opponent. You know, it likes to set up kind of soft locks, and then from there, you really don't have to commit your Valkyrises and Trishulas and Brios. You just summon small things like Sanju and Manju. You get little pokes in until your opponent actually wants to counter you, knowing damn well that your opponent has practically zero chance of OTKing you, because all you have to do is keep this guy as kind of like the ace in the hole so that you never really can get OTK'd. You know, keep this guy as the ace in the hole so that they can really never get over your Unicorn as long as you have this guy in your hand. You know what I mean? Now, one of the really good things about Nekroz is, since like Infernoids, they're not actually extra deck based, it leaves you a ton of space in your extra deck. I mean, yeah, you're probably going to run a couple of Arc Lights and Lavalval Chain so that you can send Jin to the graveyard, Abyss Dweller, because if you make Unicorn with it, it gets that really nice attack gain, and probably a couple of Castells and an Exiton Knight. But outside of that, I mean, I would assume that the rest is just a bunch of random synchros that, I mean, the only reason they're there is so that you can match up their levels. So when you use Kaleidoscope, you can kind of just ritual summon for free. What it means is that, you know, if there are new rank 4 Xyzs that come out, it means that you'll easily be able to put them in the deck. You won't have to be like Sertellar Knights where, you know, a new Sertellar Knight Xyz comes out and it's like, oh shit, well now I can't run Ragnar Zero. Oh shit, now I can't run 101 anymore. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have tons of space in the extra deck, and you're really not going to run into any issues there. So overall, if you couldn't tell, I think that Nekroz this is the best ritual deck that Konami has ever made by far, and it's not even close. And I also think that this is one of their best deck building jobs ever. I mean, people can say that they're overpowered, but for decks like Shadows and decks like Nekroz, they had to be powerful like that. You look at it because you're taking a mechanic that has inherently been power creeped. Fusion summoning is not as good as Exceed summoning, so they had to overcompensate to make Shadows good. Ritual summoning is the same way. You know what I mean? They had to overcompensate to make ritual summoning good because there were so many pitfalls with ritual effect, or with ritual monsters, and with ritual decks in general. So, you know, every monster getting 2 effects and the ritual cards being able to summon themselves for free, that was basically needed. So I think that this is unquestionably a tier 1 deck. Honestly, I think that it is probably the best deck in the game by a small margin, not by a tier. And I think that it's one that it's going to cause players to adjust because like the current builds of Burning Abyss where you try and OTK your opponent, it's just not going to work on this deck. You know, when they're Tellarknights, they go Trevor and they basically win. Well, if your opponent has Unicorn, you have to adjust your game plan. So let me know what you guys think. I think Nekroz are going to be around for a long time, at least until probably in the next year, unless Konami just destroys them with the ban hammer. But even then, in the OCG, they're still like technically the best deck. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching as always.